Great. Thank you, everybody, for joining. It is already March, and this is a conversation I think people are excited to have, and we're excited to continue having, because it has come up for quite a while. So thank you for joining us on this new conversation. We have Tracy Wendt, the Executive Director for the Sun River Watershed Group, with us, and Matt Norberg with Montana Department of Natural Resources and Conservation. And he is on their StreamGauge network program, and I've seen him present on this topic. Actually, both of them presented together at the Montana Association of Conservation Districts conference, which was where I heard the talk and thought that us trying to continue that would be a really great idea. And before we jump into the talk, I'll just go over a couple little things for today. And I'll just let you know we do have until 1 o'clock scheduled today, and hopefully we won't chat too long so that we can get into some good conversations and allow questions. You can add questions to the chat anytime, and Kira and I will monitor those to make sure we can ask them or answer them in real time. But at the end, we will have plenty of time as well. Since we do have fewer than 20 people, I think that we will go ahead and do introductions. So if you can just give your name, organization, and then maybe a little bit of just your interest, or if your group or groups that you work with are involved in funding or partnering in funding these gauges, because a lot of this talk today will be about the funding of gauges. And then otherwise, that will be it. And we'll have time to chat at the end. We can put videos on and decide if we want to stop the recording at the end when we get to more of the conversation and question part. So with that, I will get us started into the more formal part. So today we do have Tracy Wendt and Matt Norberg with us to talk about supporting stream gauges for today's conservation conversation topic. And this topic came up because it's in response to information that was sent to us as Montana Watershed Coordination Council, but that many people in our network were receiving as early as October of 2024 about a list of USGS gauges that were at risk of being shut down primarily due to a lack of funding. And so we wanted to see what we can do about that topic, but also realized en route that there was a lot of education that needed to be done and shared with the network about how collaboratively funded gauges actually work and how stream gauge funding works in general. So we have much more expert people than myself on this topic, but us trying to support the network wanted to bring them together. So again, we have Tracy Wendt. She's the Executive Director of the Sun River Watershed Group. And so I'll read a short bio for her. She joined Sun River Watershed Group in October 2018. And while attending the University of Montana, she worked on Rock Creek and the Clark Fork and Blackfoot Rivers. She then worked as aquatic habitat biologist for Wyoming Game and Fish, and she was on the Popo Aggie River in Lander and the East Fork of the Wind River. Then at the Big Thompson Watershed Coalition in Colorado as a project manager. So now she has a background not only with all those groups, but in flood recovery, habitat improvement, and collaborative project approaches that she's bringing to the Sun River Watershed team. She's on the Missouri Fly Fishers and Montana Watershed Coordination Council boards, and is an associate supervisor with the High Plains Conservation District. This little free time that she has left, she can be found exploring with breweries and rivers and streams with her 2 dogs, Gus and Huckleberry. And I will add to that background is their group does have experience with these agreements, and so she'll be bringing a lot of real world experience to the conversation today. And as well, Matt Norberg, he is a data section supervisor with Montana DNRC in the Water Sciences Bureau. And he's been in water resources for over 20 years, beginning with an education, Bachelor's of Science in Fisheries Management from Montana State University in 2001. His first water resources career opportunity was in the consulting world as a project manager, conducting stream restoration and riparian enhancement projects across Montana, Wyoming, and Connecticut. He later moved to Boise, Idaho to become the project manager for the Environmental Sciences Division for Millennium Science and Engineering Incorporated. Moving back to Montana in 2006, Matt took a job with DNRC in the same bureau, working on the Big Hole River Arctic Grayling CCAA, this Candidate Conservation Agreement with Assurances. So now we're realizing he has even better expertise, very specific. Continuing that career, he transferred to the DNRC State Water Projects Bureau and managed the water measurement program for the state-owned dams and canals. Now he is back managing the real-time stream gauge program, and I think you'll hear why real-time gauges are important. As the data section supervisor, he and his team are currently working to expand this state-based program by providing this data to citizens in Montana. Matt and his wife Beth and their 2 boys, Griffin and Bennett, enjoy the bountiful opportunities that Montana has to offer. They enjoy Capitol High School soccer, Jefferson High School football, hiking, mountain biking, hunting, and fishing, along with their dogs also, Australian Shepherds, Paco and Rio. And Matt especially appreciates whitewater trips, which I can appreciate both of their love for pets and water. And I think especially right now where it's getting so sunny out right now that everyone is thinking about those days ahead. So thank you for letting me give a good intro to these 2, because I hope they're part of your networks. And we will get started. I'll start with our second shout out, which is just to us. We're enjoying doing these small conservation conversations. We're excited to have new sponsors if there's anyone out there in your network you think might want to. But right now we are going to continue these small discussions because we do think it's really important to make sure we make the time and space for that. And so I'll share just a couple slides as we get into this, because we recognize that there is not a USGS representative that is on this presentation, and we don't want to speak too much for them or about them and answer questions on their behalf. But we did want to bring a little bit more framing to this conversation. And so I'm just going to give a little bit more background again on why MWCC is interested in this topic and why it became a topic at all today. And so again, it was this list that came out and these announcements that were made in both October and December of 2024. And those announcements basically slated that there were 9 long-term gauges that were run in Montana by USGS that were slated to be terminated either in December of 2024 or June of this year. So there's a couple different lists, ones that was a little more rapidly at risk than others, but that list came out, and what we were made aware of at that time is that each one of those gauges being shut down cost approximately $19,000 to keep running, and so the total cost was about $179,000 that was lacking. And they were sites that have a range of operation. I was pretty surprised to see some of the gauges had been operated between 5 to even 69 years. So some of them have been very long-term sources of data for all the federal, state, local management partners and organizations that use them. But it wasn't necessarily the amount of time or location that was the only contributor to the list of gauges. There's some push for USGS to move some of their gauges to a more real-time data collection. And so of course that causes some gauges to cost more to operate than others. And the USGS network is about 7,000 gauges. So it is quite a lot. And of course, 9 is a small number from 7,000, but I think it did start to raise hackles from groups across the state of what does that mean for us in our local gauge? Is there anything we can do? And that was sort of the next question of what do we do about these 9 gauges that are on this bigger list? This list to be at risk. Some of those gauges had initially gained funding through programs in 2009 that actually increased the funding for many of them. And now over time, that funding has just gotten more difficult to upkeep. And so where that's put us at kind of more to date, and this is a live website that is really nice to search because you can click on each gauge and figure out the location, what's happening to it, who you can contact about it. And so since those original updates, we were actually past the first threshold of when gauges would be shut down. So 5 actually have been discontinued in Montana. Those are shown in the gray. It's a little bit hard to see in the map, but 5 are discontinued. 2 in eastern Montana in the blue locations have found funding. And then there are 5 gauges that still remain at risk. And those are those that are slated for discontinuation in June of this year. Each one of these gauges does have contact information for, again, where the gauge is, but it also has contact information for who at USGS would be a potential partner to basically accept funding to keep these gauges running. And so that's sort of what we want to talk about a little bit next, is just what does that mean and how can USGS actually accept funding for these gauges? Because I know us as MWCC have thought this is a very valuable resource to all of our network, but also Montana's public. And so there can be, this can be a really good way to get the public involved with supporting those resources. And so we've been wondering what we can do to help and how we fit in. And along the way, Tracy and Matt have educated us that we wanted to share. There's actually a little bit of there's definitely a set process, and it can be sometimes a little complicated for how these gauges are actually funded. And so it's not necessarily true that gauges set for losing funding are only federal or only paid for by a cooperative group. It's actually a combination. But typically, these gauges in the U.S. Stream Gauge Network are funded through congressionally appropriated funds each year. And also, USGS can enter into these cooperative matching fund agreements, a CMF, with other federal, state, tribal, or local agencies to fund the agreements. But what is important is that these agreements do need to be with other government level entities. And so individuals, nonprofits, and other, I would say, non-administrative, non-governmental entities are not able to manage those to actually allow the funds to get to USGS. So in some cases, and as you'll hear from Tracy more, you have to get really creative for when groups and or individuals can contribute to this effort altogether. As I mentioned in the original announcement, it cost about $19,000 per gauge that was slated to be shut down in Montana. If you kind of look generally across the range of those 7,000 gauges USGS manages, those range much more greatly, and some of them cost up to $35,000 to manage. And again, imagine those are with more real-time monitoring and that type of updated data that they're able to process. I was going to add here too, just a little bit about private funded gauges. And of course, any entity in Montana that wanted to operate and maintain their own stream gauge could do so. And right now, I wasn't able to find a map of where those private locations are. And there aren't very many. There's only about 4 in Montana. And but also some gauges are managed by tribal governments and tribal entities. And so there are a variety of ways, but primarily what we've been focused on is this kind of additional challenge facing specifically USGS funded gauges. And so I may have left more questions, but hopefully that's a kind of quick intro to where we are with this program. And I will change over to Matt to talk a little bit more about, the DNRC side, but also how USGS and DNRC do or don't interface.
Thanks, Amy. You guys all hear me? Hopefully. And see me, yeah. So I guess I just wanted to focus a little bit, like Amy mentioned, on the DNRC side of things. It's a fairly newer program compared to the USGS. We don't have 69 years of record or 100 years of record on things, but back in 2015, the legislature asked DNRC to compile a what we call state water plan. And in the state water plan, some of the key recommendations were for DNRC to establish their own network of gauges across the state to expand the overall gauge network, basically filling in some data gaps on places that USGS has not been historically monitoring sites. So that's kind of the background for our program. So from 2015 till current, we've been working on building our own network of gauges that are real-time enabled. So we have a website, and I think Amy will show this here in a second, of the sites that we have currently installed and monitoring. Yep, there we go. So the light blue ones are gauges that are have real-time capacity. The black ones are discontinued sites from basically studies, small projects that we've done over the years. The red ones are kind of seasonal gauges that we utilize in some current studies and things like that. And then the kind of the boxy hatch thing are sites that are operated by Montana FWP. We just work on a cooperative agreement with them to host their data on our website. So Amy, can you actually go back to that last slide? Okay, so I guess I just want to kind of really go back a little bit and talk about what exactly is a stream gauge, so everyone kind of has understanding. The websites that you look at, the USGS, maybe the DNRC website, yes, they have discharge information on them, but that's not really what a stream gauge monitors necessarily. Basically, what a stream gauge monitors is the height of the water as it passes through our gauge cross section through there. So it actually has instrumentation that collects the elevation of the water surface relative to a datum, and then that information gets telemetered back to a satellite in the sky, and then it gets bounced back to Earth. And we and USGS collect that data. A lot of times you'll see it's called stage height, and you'll see like 3.2, 1.10, things like that. And so we turn our stage information into a relationship between stage and discharge. So technicians go out on site and string a line across a creek or a river and measure the total flow going through that specific portion, and we relate that to a gauge height information. So there are at different levels for that gauge height, there's certain discharge, and it's based on slopes and equations. So I don't want to get too technical on all this stuff, but I just want to kind of for people to understand that what's actually recorded at a gauge house is not discharge information on a continual basis. It's stage height information. So, and if there's any questions, I think we're gonna have Q&A at the end, but if there's like a real blatant question at the moment, feel free to raise your hand or blurt out or whatever. I'm totally open to questions as we go along. So Amy talked a lot about the funding. So like she mentioned earlier as well, we do not have any USGS personnel on this conversation. Thank you. So I'm gonna try and not skirt, but try and give a real brief overview of how USGS gauges are funded and then how DNRC gauges are funded. So like Amy had mentioned, there is a couple different ways that the USGS prioritizes their gauges. I'll start with the FPS, federal priority sites. So that's basically federal government prioritizes, sites across the country, and a lot of it has to do with, maybe some infrastructure that they have, downstream or upstream of reservoirs, some infrastructure from cities, flooding capacities, things like that. So those are the fully funded gauges that USGS operates. Those are also the ones that, as you can see, if you look at, there's a chart, a table of the ones that are potentially discontinued. Those are also the ones that are subject to the federal budget and how they are operated. There's also the cooperative matching program. Yeah, thank you again. And so these ones are cooperatively funded between stakeholders, DNRC, FWP, other, it could be USBOR, things like that. But so those are ones that basically take the stakeholders and they input a sum of money, and then they work in coordination with USGS to keep these gauges operational. And I'm not going to talk about, the budget moving forward, but I just know that in the last 10 years, the USGS budget hasn't really seen any upticks. So they've got a whole nation to provide for gauges and things like that. So their funding has been flat. And what happens when flat happens? I mean, costs increase, things like that. So there's got to be cuts. And this is where you're seeing these potential discontinued sites because of the full funding that the federal government provides for USGS. So who knows, maybe they'll get more, maybe they'll stay the same. I mean, we can hope for more, obviously. So that's kind of the difference between like the fully funded federal sites and then the cooperatively managed sites. Again, fully funded means fully funded by the federal government. The cooperative sites are taking stakeholders that are in Montana or wherever the state is, and they're matching some kind of percentage to keep operating those gauges in Montana with some federal kickback. So, where are these gauges located? They're located all over the place. I mean, it's, you got Eastern Montana gauges, you've got west of the divide, you've got Central Montana, and there's reasons for where these sites are located. A lot of the USGS gauges are, they have them basically at headwaters or where the rivers exit Montana. It's really a volume quantification. And then also there's also sites that are, maybe above towns. Like there's a site on the Yellowstone above Billings. And, that's obviously pretty important for Billings as a flood capacity. And also in terms of drought conditions, water availability for, domestic use, things like that. So, but there's also sites across the state that are, don't have these bigger volumes of rivers. And that's where DNRC tries to focus on. Some of the data gaps that we've identified is, we're working on administrative capacities. So we're trying to work on water rights, physical availability. We're also trying to help possibly distribution projects with water commissioners. We do some things with, well, I mean, if you look at a stream gauge in general, I mean, there's, you may have one single priority that's really important, but then there's all kinds of people, entities, agencies, things like that benefit from the data that we collect, USGS collects. So it's not just a, one thing, it's not just a flooding component or a drought component, but it's also, it can be fisheries, it can be all kinds of water quality things like that. So these gauges, the data that's provided is used by many different stakeholders. So that's one thing to really take into account, I think, when we're looking at, where these gauges are located and why they're located at certain places. It's kind of interesting because USGS and DNRC, we do work collaboratively to keep these gauges operational, and not only from a component of like the DNRC program that I operate and my team operates, but also DNRC identifies that these USGS gauges are really important for the Water Rights Administration of Montana. And so we provide a pretty substantial amount of money each year to USGS to keep these cooperative funds, matching and keep these stream gauges operational. So there's definitely a collaboration between USGS and DNRC, as well as, FWP pays a pretty good chunk of change. We have a compacts division within DNRC that also pays a good chunk of money as well. So there's definitely a collaboration. And, you know, really the goal for these is for people in the field, people that manage water in the field every day. I mean, these real-time gauges, there's data, updated data every hour. And, I mean, say you've got, like I mentioned, Yellowstone and Billings. And 2022 is a great example. You know, there's a big flood on the Yellowstone that happened from Yellowstone Park. And, we could see that data coming through, and it's not only for the city of Billings. I mean, it's for floodplains, for FEMA. It's all kinds of things that really alert, you know, these cities, towns for flooding conditions. But there's also other things as well, like the I'll talk about water commissioners a little bit, and you know, they're making decisions on the ground to distribute water to irrigators, water users in general. And this information that's posted on a real-time basis is really important for their job to make these decisions. Instead of having drive 50 miles out to a head gate, make a change on the head gate, and then maybe they drive back and then they go, oh crap, I didn't make enough of an adjustment, and then they have to drive back. I mean, these are things that are really important for managers, water management decisions in the field. So this real-time monitoring is super important. And then not only that, but it provides a basis, a period of record. So basically we can look at trends across, you know, over the years. We get our wet years, we get our dry years. We really start to see these, you know, these trends of water data and the availability of water in Montana, which is really important for Montana in general. So again, if there's any questions, feel free to ask. So I guess that's kind of my component to this discussion. I guess funding, I missed a little bit on the funding part. I talked a little bit about USGS, but Montana funding. So the program that we operate at DNRC has gone through a couple different iterations of the funding components. Just recently in the last legislative session, 2023, we applied, or we requested funding to expand our network to the state water plan recommendation of 100 gauges. And we got a award for that. And that's why we've installed quite a few gauges in the past 2 years. It was called a one-time only fund. So it was one time only that we've got money to install instrumentation, hire personnel to operate the gauges. And then in this current legislative session, 2025, we've done another round of funding request to build out that 100 gauges, and then to solidify the personnel that we have operating these. Because if we don't have personnel, it's like changing the oil in your car. You have to maintain you know, what you have available to you. And if you don't maintain things, they break and they don't work, and rivers are dynamic. They change all the time. So that's where, you know, these technicians go out and calibrate the flow measurements to stage measurements. So it's a constantly, you know, evolving process as things change. And so currently the way that DNRC is working right now is that we're utilizing taxpayer dollars through our House Bill 2 Section C budget. And so there's no cost to or stakeholders that request a gauge in their location. Obviously, there's certain priorities that we have to go down. There's a list of different things that we look at in terms of, you know, water rights administration, water commissioners, fisheries, all kinds of different things that we prioritize how these gauges get installed at. But currently, right now, DNRC does not charge a, you know, specific landowner or cooperator or whatever any funds for these gauges. That may change as we move forward in the future. But that's how kind of our current funding strategy works right now. So that's kind of all I got. So
That's great. No, thank you. We can transfer over to Tracy. I don't know, Tracy, if there's I don't have a specific slide, but I know we just wanted to share and hear your story. No, it's not important. It's not a big, it's not.
I just realized
but we put some maps together. Yeah, we're just excited to hear your story.
Sure. And I just put in the chat a link to our river conditions page. I don't know if you or Kira can pull that up, but it shows the Sun River watershed and it shows our gauges. But while you guys are doing that, so the Sun River Watershed Group has, or the Sun River Watershed has multiple gauges. We have some that are federally funded, like USGS or Bureau of Reclamation. We also have DNRC gauges. And then we have at least 6 private gauges that the Sun River Watershed Group has bought the parts for and pays someone to maintain every year. So the reason we have all of these different gauges is, like Matt mentioned, there's a lot of different reasons that people use stream gauges. So our biggest in our watershed is irrigation. We have several irrigation districts, and the largest one, Greenfields, operates our main water source, which is the Gibson Reservoir. And then there's a series of gauges across the watershed that help them manage water for multiple uses. So they're thinking about getting water from Gibson Dam out onto the fields for irrigation, but they're also thinking about supplying the other irrigation companies with the water they need. They're dealing with fisheries needs, and then we've got the DNRC gauges. Some of our gauges have some FWP funding because we're monitoring temperature and at times monitoring things like sediment. Sun River has hoot-owl restrictions every year, and that's based on temperature. So we do have a gauge that collects temperature data. And then our private gauges are in response to our TMDL and the impairments that were noted in the Sun River watershed. So a lot of our impairments are associated with flows. So we have gauges that we monitor and we fund ourselves that just operate from April through September or October, depending on the irrigation season. So they're measuring water before the season starts, through the water season, and then for the month after the water season is over. And that coincides with our water quality monitoring program. So that kind of all works hand in hand so that we can monitor our TMDL issues. So I didn't have anything particular I wanted to point out on this map other than I don't know why our private gauges aren't showing up. So the ones that we fund aren't on here, but you can see some DNRC gauges and some federal gauges on this map. And then there's also measurements taken in some of the reservoirs. So one of the things that we talked about is, where does the funding come from for stream gauges? And as Matt mentioned, our the DNRC gauges in our watershed, of course, are funded by DNRC, which is wonderful because we just kind of don't have to worry about that. When I was hired to do this job, there still are the USGS gauges, but a few months into the job, they were like, oh, by the way, you have to raise about 40 grand a year for stream gauges. And I didn't understand what exactly that meant. And it turns out, I have Amy and Mike, can I share a screen or not? I don't know if people would care to see what a cooperative agreement looks like. But when I was hired to do this job, Sun River Watershed Group is a nonprofit, so we can't hold a cooperative agreement with USGS. So our cooperative agreements were under our local conservation district's name. And let me see if it'll let me do this. Yeah, it should. Yeah, so this is it sharing? Now I can't tell which screen it's sharing. Are you guys seeing a cooperative?
Showing yep, like a receipt with USGS.
Okay, good. Yes. So you can see on this, it's a Cascade Conservation District is who holds the cooperative agreement. You can see where the gauge is located at. And then over here is where it shows the cost share. So Cascade Conservation District is responsible for this amount. USGS covers this amount, which is, as you can see, not quite half. And what happened over the years is USGS only had a certain amount to put towards that gauge every year. So their amount stayed pretty much the same. However, the cost to operate the gauge goes up. So the Cascade Conservation District share would go up and up and up every year. And then Cascade Conservation District doesn't, I mean, not that they don't care, but it's not really a gauge that they wanted or were concerned about. It was the watershed group. So we were responsible for going to all sorts of different people and asking them to help us fund this gauge. And so every year I was having to regroup and, okay, why is it important? Who uses it? And who should care about this gauge? And then go and ask them for money. And then we had some recurring donors and then some that sometimes they give us money and sometimes they didn't. The nice thing with this one is that FWP was funding the temperature portion because that had to do with hoot owl restrictions and fish habitat. But this $8,000 through 2020, this is what the bill was in 2020. This $8,000 I had to find the money for. And this was just one of 4 USGS gauges that I had to raise the funds for. So what ended up happening is trying to raise all that money plus money for my own salary plus for our projects got to be just way too much. And luckily we have a water management working group, and at one of the meetings I just told all of our partners that I couldn't afford to, I wasn't able to raise those funds every year. The conservation district is on the hook for the money, so they're the ones. It's like having a credit card that's in somebody else's name, right? So we're charging it up, but they're the ones that, you know, have their name on the bill. So I don't need to share this anymore, but unless someone had a question about it. But so what we ended up doing is for each gauge, we went to the parties that had the greatest interest in that gauge and asked them to work with USGS and take over their portion of the cost share agreement. I don't even remember who ended up taking over this, the Muddy Creek gauge, ended up being funded through a combination of the local irrigation district and DNRC. If there's water rights associated with it, DNRC might have an interest. I tried to go to NOAA and the Weather Service, like, hey, is there an interest for you guys because of flood? But I think it was like federal to federal, they couldn't put funds towards it. So it was, some of the gauges were really tricky because everybody uses them, but not everybody has the money to pay for them or has, there's, you know, interdepartmental or agency issues. But we were finally able to get all of our stream gauges funded. USGS gauges, we pushed the cost share off onto other people. So now I just raise money for our seasonal gauges and our you know, staff costs and project costs. But it's Matt kind of alluded to this when that picture was up of the person doing stream flow measurements, and he was talking about the stage height versus the actual flows. Like, creating that rating curve and keeping that up to date is part of that expense. So every year they come out and recalibrate all of our gauges, all of our rating curves, you know, at least once a year. You know, if there's a flood, if there's a major algae buildup, if there's anything that happens that changes kind of the shape of the channel, they have to remeasure it and recalibrate that gauge. And that's part of the cost for, you know, people ask why USGS gauges are so much. You just plug them in, right? You put all the machinery in there and probably have to do some maintenance once in a while, but you know, but they have to drive all the way from Billings or from wherever and come out and calibrate that gauge and do whatever maintenance is on it. And I don't even know what happens on the back end. So I can't think of anything else to add. So I think we're ready for questions maybe. unless I forgot something you wanted me to talk about.
No, that's great. And actually it made me have one question we can start. And because I also realize we can have people come online and introduce themselves and say hello as we get into the discussion. It made me realize that I hadn't actually thought as much about the private gauges being some of those seasonally operated ones that are like, I guess you would essentially be the owner operators of those gauges, and that would be where there are probably so many more than out there. I don't know, then I didn't realize, so what is like the total number you guys are using in your watershed to manage?
Our private gauges, we have 6 or 7. I can't remember if they're all online right now. And then those are housed through, I think, I don't know if all of them go through DNRC's website, for the satellite part of that picture you had up. I don't know. I can't remember how many of them go through DNRC or if some of them go through reclamation. They might all be DNRC now.
Very cool. And then I guess I did have one other question about those, was thinking about their use for the TMDL management. And so were you able to create those in partnership with Department of Environmental Quality, or are those purely your decision to install so that you could monitor?
They were set up so long ago. Our private gauges, I think, have been in place for like 20 years. So definitely they precede me. I don't know how they were started. I assume that the streams were chosen in collaboration with DEQ, and we get a lot of support from MSU Water Quality Extension, Water Quality. So a lot of them kind of coincide with where we're doing water quality monitoring further downstream, where we're actually collecting samples and sending them into the lab. So I'm not sure, or where we had originally intended to, but then I don't even know how all that started. It was so long before me, but yeah, so and it's been really interesting too, because the several of the gauges washed out in the flooding in 2018 and 2019. And one of them we had, like on Upper Muddy Creek, we decided that location was probably going to wash out again and again. So we picked a new location. We had to get all the parts together. I think we got a small grant, and then we pieced together parts that were contributed from some of our partners, and we got this gauge back up, and within 3 months someone shot it and it quit working. And so we had to get replacement parts and get that all fixed. So it was offline for most of one season, but we had it going again for the next season. So there's a lot in operating and maintaining your own gauges, but it's cheaper than USGS. But it's a lot.
Do folks want to come off on camera or say hello? You don't have to feel obligated, but we can open up to questions.
Hi, I have a question. And maybe I'll introduce myself first. My name is Emily Henry. I'm a program coordinator for the Western Montana Conservation Commission. We are an administrative attachment to DNRC. Just kind of generally interested in this topic, and it's something that our commission has not yet been involved in, but the ask has been made of us potentially to try to help support this network. I have a question, I think probably for Matt. I'm curious if there are any differences in water quality data standards or like QA/QC type things between the data that USGS collects or DNRC collects, and how does that impact anything with these like cooperative agreements or anything like that?
So I guess I would first start off by saying DNRC is water quantity. we do collect water temperature at many of our sites, but we really focus on quantity instead of quality. That's DEQ's kind of wheelhouse. In terms of QA/QC, field field protocols, we try and follow USGS standard operating procedures very closely. We have SOPs generated for all that stuff. And then kind of post-processing, we do the same thing. We use the exact same software that USGS uses. What we don't have is a nation of support that USGS has in terms of like going through different offices and working their way down through a whole chain of command. We're a little bit smaller shop here at DNRC, but we do, you know, all the same procedures that USGS does in terms of QA/QC, corrections and data shifts, things like that. So the data that you see on our website is typically shifted. And when I say shifted, that's basically it's a shift from the base rating curve. So it's say like an example is you look at Montana in August, rivers and streams in August, and what do you see in there? There's a whole lot of vegetation growing, and what it does is it basically backs up the water, right? So there's maybe the same volume of water going down, but the stage elevation has risen, and so we have to shift that the rating curve to mimic or to explain why there's a raise in elevation, but there's the same amount of water, or maybe even decreasing in August when it's, you know, hot and dry and we haven't seen anything later. So all that data is up to date on a continual basis. So when our field techs go out and measure the water, they take a stage measurement and they take a discharge measurement, and we relate that accordingly on the rating curve. So did that answer all your question? I hope so.
Yeah, it did. Thank you.
Sure.
I have one more question too. You mentioned another funding request for this legislative session. Has that been successful, or have they made a decision on that yet?
I believe that it's passed the House and it's going into executive action. So I think the last step for us is for the governor's sign off or change, but it wasn't the governor's budget to begin with. That's House Bill 2 is always, you know, kind of in that realm. But yeah, I mean, there's been quite a bit of talk about stream gauges this legislative session. There's been a couple of bills introduced. I think House Bill 55 and Senate Bill 61, I believe. Basically, it talks about that the state should recognize that stream gauging is really important. And it's not just DNRC or not just USGS, but collectively, it's a really important thing for the state of Montana, and that it should be put in statute to kind of support, you know, like why this money is being spent, why taxpayer dollars are being spent on either like my program specifically, or funds that are funneled through DNRC to help pay for USGS gauges. So it's just, they're kind of generalized bills, but there's good impact that are associated with them. So
Thanks.
yeah.
And I don't know, Matt or Tracy, if you know, but Kate mentioned a comment in the chat that if there was somewhere a map or maybe a place where it's broken down of what is federal versus state funded and managed gauges in the state, like if there's a compilation of those. I've only seen them in separate places so far, but
So I will say that on our stage website, that's the DNRC website. So we have obviously our gauges, which are highlighted, but if you zoom in places, it might be a little bit harder to tell, just but we do have USGS gauges on our site as well. They're little,
oh, okay.
they're kind of light blue boxes that are not as pronounced as the DNRC ones because it's a different system. But yeah, they are incorporated onto the DNRC stage website. What, I think it's just links is what it is actually, but I'm looking at one right now. It's it'd be the Yellowstone River at Forsyth. I just happened to pull that one up, and that's a link to the USGS gauge on our website. So we want to make sure we try to keep it all encompassing of we don't have CSKT stuff on there. That's a separate program, but we do have USGS gauges on there as well.
Yeah, thank you. I guess just to elaborate a little, I think people don't really, like the general public or even people who use the data, I'm thinking like guides and outfitters don't really know who runs which gauge, and it feels like the outreach that maybe would be helpful is to kind of, you know, which ones are at risk and why, and how do we fix this for the long term instead of all of, you know, it seems like it comes up every 2 years, whether it's state or federal funding. It's like, you know, people really rely on this data, and so it's kind of, I guess, shocking that we don't know more about which one is which and how they're different and which ones need the most help. So thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'd expound on that just a little bit. Yeah, I mean, with the funding that we've gotten in the last session and hopefully in this session, we are definitely looking at doing some more outreach and stuff, because we go into different basins and we, you know, do studies and whatever, and everyone knows DNRC. I mean, that's especially irrigators. I mean, they know because they're doing water rights stuff, but they don't necessarily know that we operate a network that's basically the same thing as USGS, it's just state operated. So we are definitely looking at some more outreach, and we have a whole bureau that is dedicated to communications. So yeah, well, it'll become more apparent as we move forward in the future. So
Can I ask a small question to that too? And Tracy, maybe I'll let you pop in. I'm wondering if, because, so if DNRC is sort of hosting the availability of, say, Sun River Watershed Group's data, so those seasonal gauges, would the public see those data? Because then if, to me, that's a way to incentivize the public to know to support the private owner of those gauges more directly, because they're actually a nonprofit group, not just private gauges. I don't know if that made sense, but if those private ones are also on DNRC's information.
I think they show up on the stage site, don't they, Matt? The ones that you are gauges that you guys
the ones that DNRC
do.
operates, yes, they are. Like one is Mill Coulee,
Yeah.
or Elk Creek. Those ones are highlighted on our website, but any of the private ones at Sun River Watershed Group, I don't know how many you have, but those are not shown on our stage website. But I think you showed it on your website for the river conditions tool.
Okay, that makes sense. And I was asking of that one specifically too, because I agree with Kate, like it's very helpful to know, as well as we would like to connect with groups that we maybe can help bolster them to do local fundraising for those, to figure out how we can contribute more directly. So very helpful. Well, I guess are there other questions? Because with a couple minutes left, I should start transitioning us out of here and get you on the rest of your way for the afternoon. We will send a recording out for this. And as well, unless anyone has objections, we do like to be able to share contact information. So that you can connect with each other further. And so I'll share quickly as we wrap up. Oh, I can't shrink the bottom of that screen. So that's something. But our symposium is coming up this year, our biennial event. Okay, it's not going to let me do it. I'm just leaving it like that. I apologize. It's going to be September 15th through 19th. The 15th is a Monday. And so we'll have that primarily as a travel day and then have the event during the rest of the week. We are partnering with the Win It Aces on this, and we're super excited to basically try to bus everyone up to Win It for the day to make sure we can get some very good local flavor to the symposium. But we're going to talk a lot about collaboration and share projects that are going on, and we just want you to make sure to hold this date and come join us. For those of you that saw our watershed tour last year, it's about the same week of the year, and we're going to try to start keeping this week of the year the same for our alternating events. And hopefully we can avoid the October meeting crunch for everybody. And then please consider joining us next month for our conservation conversation. We're going to have Maddie Larson and Lacey Enos from the MACD, Montana Association of Conservation Districts, and they are going to talk about a project that we've been working on together to revamp the conservation menu, which is a funding website for the state. So hopefully you join us then. Thank you all for coming. Thank you to our two speakers today. It was nice to see you all. Please reach out to each other with conversations and questions, and us as well. And have a good rest of your day.